Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I'm not quite sure what the member for Mordialloc was grieving about after that 15 minutes, but I am here today to grieve for regional Victorians who are victims of neglect and regional discrimination from the Labor government. Every week in this place we hear about we hear from members in statements how a minister's been out to their electorate to open an envelope or to announce something or whatever it is, but rarely do we see them, unless there is something occurred that's usually dire, bushfires, storms, something that can't be ignored, rarely do we see them in other patches. And rarely, even more rare, is an invitation to such events, just about as rare as that government infrastructure spending. Now, we see the Victorian Treasurer in the media having a crack at his federal counterpart for not getting Victoria's fair share of tax revenue. But you know what? It's about time to practice what you preach. Over 25% of Victorians live in the regions. That's a quarter, at least, over that. So how about, instead of sinking money into Commonwealth Games blowouts, $38 billion in budget blowouts? The member for Mordialloc's familiar with the number 38, I'm sure, after 38 cabinet shuffles, and he still hasn't got one. But what infuriates those out in the regions is that the big hole under the city where they can see, cost blowouts in the suburban rail loop, the metro tunnel. Meanwhile, you've got people out in the regions growing your food, growing your fibre, that are getting a half-done, half-cooked Murray Basin rail project and having to get that food and fibre to market and port on roads that are barely worthy enough to carry a horse and cart. It is, where do you think your avocado on toast and your almond lattes come from? Certainly doesn't come from the barista. It's coming from us. And you know what? It is insane that we are having to get, there is a really simple solution for most of these things. There was a plan for the Murray Basin rail loop, and that has been put on the table. Now, all we know, and there's been research on this, in fact, Mildura Regional Development put in a submission to the National Freight and Supply Chain Strategy in October last year, and they said not converting the Maryborough to Ballarat Gering Gap line, which is the Maryborough Freight Corridor that I talk about standardising and reinstating, not doing that, not standardising that line, has severely compromised supply chain resilience during times of train service disruptions, and there are a few. There's no contingency route, because at the moment those trains have to come from the northwest of the state and go via Ararat. That's like driving a car from Mildura to Melbourne via Shepparton. It makes absolutely no sense at all. Meanwhile, we've got cost blowouts in city rail projects. At the same time, the trucks are getting bigger. It used to be, Deputy Speaker, that the most common truck that you might see on major highways from the north of the state to port or to market would be a road train, a B double, an A double, depending on what they're carrying. Now you have not even some of the biggest freight companies in this state, but you've got family farmers who are running fleets of 10+ B quads. Same axle weights, but these are really big, really intimidating. If you can picture that, I can see your mind ticking over, that is 4 trailers into, not me, I'm not talking about me, but if you can imagine that these same roads that are, and I have stopped to measure them many times, not more than 3 metres in width, when you've got, if you are coming up to in a sedan, and again, tourists are on the roads all the time. Google Maps sometimes takes the quickest route on back roads that it absolutely shouldn't, because it's the quickest route. People go, I'll go the quickest route. being completely unaware that there's no shoulders, or the shoulders that are there have a drop-off of over 10 centimetres. They're not wide enough, so it is literally a case of them being very intimidated, coming up against not only the road trains and the B doubles and the A doubles that are still there, but these B quads that are huge. And you trying to drive that at night around windy roads with all of the wildlife that's about to get worse in the northwest of the state, the kangaroos, the foxes, the goats, and now the wild dogs that farmers are not allowed to protect their lambs from? I mean, how on earth do you prioritise protecting wild dogs over livestock, over lambs? How are you comfortable with seeing lambs that have been mauled by wild dogs and go, no, we need to protect the dingo. We need to change the unprotection laws or the unprotection orders so that we can protect them, so their numbers can grow. That is absolutely insane. Next, we'll be hearing that lamb prices have skyrocketed again. The farmer probably won't pocket it because of supply issues. When at the moment, it's been hard to sell lambs for more than $50 a head. I mean, it just defies logic. It absolutely defies logic. And let me circle back. I got distracted by the wild dog thing because it is really topical at the moment. Obviously, with the unprotection laws changing last week at midnight, I got a call from the minister's office on the Thursday telling me that the orders were changing at midnight that night. How do I communicate that without an email blast? And it's not common practice all of the time for farmers to be sitting watching their emails at all hours of the night. But apart from doing an email or a text blast, how do you communicate that with your constituency out in the bush? Papers are still really important, and it'll be in the paper. It'll be in the paper. No, it'll be in the paper this week. But while I was talking about rail, Mildura is the only regional city in this state that doesn't have passenger rail service. Now, I know those on the other side talk about, oh, well, that was cut out 30 years ago. Well, you know what? The windscreen is bigger than the rear vision. There has been decades to fix it. It is professed all the time, decades to fix it. There's been promises to fix it. So this is why people in the great northwest of the state get so furious when they see money being sunk into a big hole under the city and they still have to drive. And some people, cost of living is biting everyone really hard. Cost of petrol to get to the city for healthcare, for appointments, because they can't get them where they live. It is regional discrimination at its best. While we're talking about healthcare, let's talk about the public hospital system, shall we? So far in deficit, staff are not supported the way they should be. I get letters from staff, I get emails every single day. I've started compiling it into a nice little dossier binder, and I don't even like paper, but it's got to that point so that we can go and prove to, because of course, those on the other side don't often believe that this is the state, but I have letters from staff begging to dig deeper in and look at the public health system and what's happening. At the end of the day, where do you start? Where on earth do you start? Do you start at the budget blowouts that are not being funded correctly? Do you look at the obvious want to centralise services? Or do you look at, honestly, where do you start?
I remind the member that you refer to the chair, so. Apologies,
Deputy Speaker. Where would the Deputy Speaker start? I'd be interested to know, in fact, because the state of our public hospitals at the moment is another example of the Labor government who can't manage money, can't manage projects, and certainly can't manage a public health system. And yes, we cop it all the time about public hospitals being managed by third parties. Well, honestly, that's their business, managing a hospital with a bank of specialists on call so you can get a specialist appointment when you need it. You can get investment when you need it. If you need 30 extra ED beds, then you don't have to beg, borrow and steal from the government. You don't have to beg, borrow and steal for a $45 million top-up. And at the end of the day, all we want from our hospitals, I don't care who manages them, all we want is to be able to go to the hospital and know that those hard-working staff in there are well supported to deliver the best health care possible, that we can take our kids to the ED when they need it, that we know that it's going to be there and the staff are ready to deliver and are supported and haven't had to have been working overtime, for weeks and months on end and are stressed to the point where they're reconsidering their career. We don't want that, because those people that work in healthcare, that work on the front line are, angels doing God's work, honestly, and I admire them and I am in awe of them every day. Now, I did go and have a look at the feedback that I've been receiving over the past couple of months through the office. And issues coming, important issues that the people of the Mildura electorate are concerned about, and it's no surprise. Guess what's number one, Deputy Speaker? Roads. Roads and transport make up the bulk of complaints. Potholes, shoulders, not being wide enough, needing reconstruction, because as the member for Gippsland South stated in his grievance debate, the patch-up jobs that are being done are ridiculous. There needs to be some sort of accountability for the contractors doing this work, because in our part of the state, when it gets warm, and it does, we've just had a week of 40 degrees, that whatever they're using to patch those up, as soon as a truck, a B-double or even a car runs over them, it takes the road with them. It's ridiculous. Number two, health and access to specialist and mental health services. Planning issues, land tax, red tape. This is the land tax. Everyone, I think, on this side of the House has spoken about land tax this week. The thing that I hear is, yes, we get that we need regulation, but honestly, we are being strangled by red tape, taxes and admin. Housing. Member for Gippsland East also brought up why you would disincentivise the private sector from investing in rentals is just ludicrous. I'm not sure, and I know that this gets ignored because logic does by those on the other side. You need the private sector to invest in rental properties, because that's what's going to solve a housing crisis. Why you would disincentivise the private sector, mum and dad investors who own one property, at best most of the time. 70% of property investors own one property, and we slug them for it. It is absolutely insane. And they are renting them out to people that need housing, that need to rent, that can't afford to buy their own house. Emergency services, including the CFA. And also FRV up in our patch. There was a pumper that was 14 years old that broke down on a day of total fire ban the other day, which is insane. Childcare. Now, I know I've only got 2 minutes left, but I could talk about this for 15 minutes. The Hopetoun childcare, for example. The member for Euroa spoke earlier this week about how 3- and 4-year-old kinders have had to be put together in the same room. Absolutely insane for early learning. And we hear all the time about how important kindergarten is. Couldn't agree more. Yes, it is. But when you put 3, and I hear this from the kindergarten teachers themselves, I had a phone call this morning, and I've got a public meeting to go to on Tuesday, because Hopetoun childcare is at risk of closing down now, because the stress of having the kindergartens all in together is insane. There are solutions to this, and this is the stuff that could take the stroke of a pen. It doesn't even cost any money. Separate it, change hours. We need to incentivise people to go out to rural and regional centres, and they are different. We need to start talking about them differently to rural centres like Hopetoun, to get qualified staff out there to make sure that community still has an early learning centre, still has a kindergarten. You close that kindergarten and you lose the workforce in the town as well, because someone has to stay home and look after the kids. Speaker, I put out on my socials earlier about the top 3 things that people wanted to raise. Obviously, roads was the top response. And the other, actually, on healthcare was the other one. So the top 3 were housing crisis, rural professionals shortage, roads was the first one, and healthcare staff safety as well came up multiple times. Danielle says healthcare and hospital is why, wanted to know why on earth Maryborough is getting such a big upgrade. But, it just defies logic as to why, in one breath, the Treasurer says the federal government need to give us more, while the Victorian government need to stop with their regional discrimination.